Greetings comrades, my name is Gigantles, and in today's video I'll be refuting the Fatima Crusader's misleading cheat sheet against communion in the hand. Before I begin, I just need to clarify a couple of things. So firstly, I really hope you guys can't hear the fans on my laptops, and the reason why is because the UK is, at time of recording, is currently in a bit of a heat wave, and so my laptops are trying to stay cool, I'm trying to stay cool. It's a bit difficult because I can't have a fan in my room, otherwise you won't hear me. So hopefully I can get this video and the next one done within a relatively short period of time. Secondly, I'm just looking at my webcam now, if my webcam looks a bit funny, then the reason why is because instead of using Movie Studio Platinum's green screen removal equipment or software, I'm using OBS's version. I didn't even know OBS had one until I checked this morning. So I really hope that my eyes don't disappear in the process of recording because I have green eyes. It doesn't look that way right now. I may be a bit sharp around my edges around here. I just hope it looks okay. And if you see me looking down a lot, and the reason why is because similar to my last video where I looked at Return to Traditions video about the Dark Marian prophecy being fulfilled, I was looking at a notebook. But here instead of a notebook, I have my phone, and on it is a bunch of articles I wrote or posts I wrote from my Facebook page, Gigantean Apologetics, where I actually covered this image that you see up here. How long ago was it? I covered it a little more than 2 years ago. It just takes a while sometimes for me to transfer stuff or for me to cover stuff on Facebook to then cover it on YouTube and vice versa. But I'll be looking at my posts because I have all the information I need there. So if you have any trouble understanding what I'm saying, and I will try to talk slowly and clearly, if you have any trouble understanding what I'm saying, you will find all these posts on my Facebook page, Gigantean Apologetics. That's promising. You'll find it on my page, Gigantean Apologetics. There's a link in the description and a link on my channel, channel information. So, I really hope you guys can't hear the fan. Okay, so, to begin with, just looking at this, and I'm going to have a bit of an awkward angle to scroll and stuff. Yeah, looking at this, this image has been going around on Facebook. It comes along every few months for me, especially in some of my groups where there's a strong rad-trad or sedevacantist presence who try to present communion in the hand as a demonic or sacrilegious, a Protestant invention, and it's all a load of rubbish, those claims. Firstly, when they try to rely on exorcisms, clips from exorcisms about claiming that communion in the hand was created by demons, that's a load of rubbish, and we shouldn't even be trusting demons for their information unless we can verify it independently with the church first, because demons are serial liars. And in the same exorcisms, I believe it was Annalise Michel, which I did cover on my channel previously, those same demons in another exorcism tape, they claim that we need to follow the Divine Mercy image, which rad-trads and sedevacantists think is demonic. So why would a demon tell us? Because according to the rad-trads and sedevacantists, demons can't lie during exorcisms. But then they claim that the Divine Mercy image is evil and demonic and stuff. So does that mean that the demons are telling us to follow a demonic thing? How can they if they're not meant to lie? I personally think people give exorcism tapes and exorcists too much leniency and not enough criticism in their contents. The exorcism tapes of Annalise Michel also told us that we don't need to use holy water, it's not necessary, and that even as something as simple as how many demons were possessing her, I think within a span of 2 minutes, the demons inside Annalise Michel claimed that there were 6 of them, and then when they listed 5, the exorcist said, "I thought you said there were 6 of you," and they said, "We lied." So it's as simple as that. And regarding the claim that communion in the hand is a Protestant tradition, it isn't, because the Protestants, or at least the Reformers, which everyone sees as synonymous with the Protestants, they came about in the 16th century, or 15th, 16th centuries, and then onwards. Whilst we have evidence of communion in the hand going back more than 1.5 centuries before, and it's an apostolic tradition to the Eastern Catholic churches in the Chaldean and Maronite churches. So, if it's an apostolic tradition, then it by definition cannot be sacrilegious, because it was established by the apostles, and the apostles would not put forward anything sacrilegious. But I may be getting a bit off topic now, so I'm just going to focus on this apparent cheat sheet here. So firstly, as you can see at the bottom of the page, can I access? There it is. This publication was from 2012, by the Fatima Crusader. I mean, just the name itself sounds very stereotypical, traditionalist. I can't take seriously any publication that has Crusader in its name, if I'm honest. They're trying too hard. And I know that the title is Communion on the Tongue is an apostolic tradition, but that's not, if you read this, you'll see that's not what it's trying to promote. It's actually trying to promote the idea that communion on the hand is condemned by the church, or at least the early church. And if you read some of these, just a quick glance, like not too much research, but just a quick read through everything, and you'll realize that there are several flaws with this argument. I noticed it even just looking at it before I did any research 2 years ago. So to begin with, the first source that they list is Pope Saint Sixtus I, sometime around 115, and he says the sacred vessels are not to be handled by others than those consecrated to the Lord. Now, if you have a pair of eyes or a pair of ears and can hopefully hear me, you will realize that this is concerning the sacred vessels. The sacred vessels are not the same as the Eucharist. So this is what did I specifically call it? I said it was unrelated, and that's what this is. This is talking about the sacred vessels, and it's condemning people from touching them, and that's correct. Similar to how in the Old Covenant, only the Levites were allowed to touch the Ark of the Covenant and the various equipment and items from the temple. We cannot touch the sacred vessels as unconsecrated individuals, and by consecrated we mean the priesthood. So there's really no way that you can link this into communion in the hand or communion on the tongue either. And actually, did I write it? I really hope I wrote it down here. Please tell me I wrote it. Oh, I don't think I wrote it. Shoot. Maybe it was Saint John Chrysostom or Saint John Damascus or Damascene. I think one of them, potentially, I could be wrong, but I remember reading this quote somewhere. They said that because we are made in the image of God, we are far more worthy of touching the Eucharist than any piece of metal that was taken out of the earth. I'll just leave you with that there. Something else I also need to bring up is that this is at the beginning of the 2nd century, but it should be noted that according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, such vessels in the 1st centuries were this is the description of the pattern, which is basically the dish that you see the communion host being broken into multiple pieces. It says, such vessels in the 1st centuries were used in the service of the altar, and probably served to collect the offerings of bread made by the faithful, and also to distribute the consecrated fragments which, after the loaf had been broken by the celebrant, were brought down to the communicants, who in their own hands received each a portion from the patina. So this isn't itself a condemnation of communion in the hand, and according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, we have communion in the hand being practiced in the 1st century. At least in the 1st centuries. The second source here, which is by Saint Basil the Great, who's a doctor of the Church, and I think that's his lifetime, between 330 to 379, he says, the right to receive Holy Communion in the hand is permitted only in times of persecution. And then he goes on to say, Saint Basil the Great considered communion in the hand so irregular that he did not hesitate to consider it a grave fault. And this is wrong. According to my research, this misses a lot of context. And the actual context of this quote says this. It is needless to point out that for anyone in times of persecution to be compelled to take the communion in his own hand without the presence of a priest or minister is not a serious offence, as long custom sanctions this practice from the facts themselves. All the solitaries in the desert, where there is no priest, take the communion themselves, keeping communion at home. And at Alexandria and in Egypt, each one of the laity, for the most part, keeps the communion at his own home and participates in it when he likes. For when once the priest has completed the offering and given it, the recipient, participating in it each time as entire, is bound to believe that he properly takes and receives it from the giver. And even in the church, when the priest gives the portion, the recipient takes it with complete power over it, and so lifts it to his lips with his own hand. It has the same validity whether one portion or several portions are received from the priest at the same time. So Saint Basil wasn't trying to condemn communion in the hand. The problem he had was that he didn't like it the thought of people receiving communion without being in the presence of a priest or a deacon to ensure that it was taken reverently and care was taken to avoid not dropping any fragments. But he accepted that there were families and individuals who were entrusted with this responsibility, and they were allowed to take communion home and receive from it whenever they want, and receive from it every day, and they could be entrusted with not desecrating it or dropping any fragments. And he gives a very clear description of receiving in the hand here. The next source here, and I have to scroll up for this. The next source is from the Council of Saragossa in 380, and it says here that it excommunicated anyone who dared continue receiving communion by hand. And then it claims that this was confirmed by the Council of Toledo. So you almost got two sources right there. So looking at the Council of Saragossa, there are 7 canons from this particular council, and only one of them mentions the reception of the Eucharist, and it words this in this specific way. The third canon. May he who receives the Eucharist and does not consume it there be anathema. Furthermore, he read, if it is proved that anyone did not consume in the church the grace of this Eucharist that he received there, he is anathematized forever. All the bishops said, so be it. So this isn't about receiving communion in the hand. This is about not consuming the Eucharist after you receive it. And sure, you could interpret this as, okay, well, the main way this probably would have happened is them receiving in the hand and not consuming it. But then it still shows that not only were they receiving it in the hand in 380 and prior to 380, but also that there was care taken to prevent people from trying to take it away and potentially desecrate it. Notice that there was a significant rewording between the original canon and how it was worded in this publication here. Regarding the Synod of Toledo, from 400 it says, those who do not really consume the Holy Eucharist, which they have received from the priest, shall be treated as sacrilegious. Which is pretty much the same thing that was said at the Council of Saragossa. There was a council in 447, but it doesn't mention anything about the Eucharist, only about dealing with the heresy of Priscillianism, which I cannot remember. I can't remember what that is. I'll look it up later. But the main thing to take away from this particular point about the apparent claim or excommunication delivered by Toledo and Saragossa is that it's a very, very bad rephrasing or rewording of what the canons actually said, and it doesn't actually condemn communion in the hand at all. It just condemns taking communion away from the church and not consuming it in the church after receiving it. And before anyone says, well, it has to be condemning communion in the hand because that's the only way you could steal the Eucharist. No, it's not. You can still steal the Eucharist even after receiving on the tongue. The first ever Eucharistic miracle, which I cannot remember the name of now, it's something in Italian. The first ever Eucharistic miracle was stolen on the tongue, and not that I've ever done it myself, but I can imagine the logistics, and I was busy pondering this for a while, just thinking, could someone steal the Eucharist on the tongue? And it's not actually that hard to do so. You just have to dry your tongue and not stick it to the roof of your mouth, and it's very easy to steal it. So where there's a will, there's a way. And just because someone steals communion doesn't mean that they were receiving it in the hand at the time. The next point to deal with here is the Synod of Rowan, and that was in 650. So, firstly, something to realize is that a synod is not the same thing as an ecumenical council. A synod covers a region, or it covers it doesn't cover the same area as a state, but it covers a region, and that could be a region within a state or a region overlapping states. And the canon that is covered here claims that condemned communion in the hand to halt widespread abuses that occurred from this practice, and as a safeguard against sacrilege. Well, the canon itself, the original canon, says, "The impropriety must cease of some priests, who, at the festival of the Mass, give the holy mysteries to some women and laymen, but without themselves partaking. Moreover, the Eucharist is not to be given to the laity into the hand, but into the mouth, with the words, Corpus Domini et sanguis prosit tibi ad remissionem peccatorum et ad vitam aeternam." And I apologize if I started speaking with an accent with that. So the problem here isn't with the laity receiving, but with the priests. The priests weren't treating communion reverently. And so in order to encourage this, and to stop the laity not receiving it reverently in turn, they were forced to not only give it on the tongue, but to also say a very specific formula beforehand to remind the priest and to reinforce the laity's belief that receiving communion was meant to be done reverently. It's not like where everyone still says this anyway. And regarding the Third Council of Constantinople here, and I have a funny story about this. It says right here that this is the 6th Ecumenical Council at Constantinople between 680 to 681, right? I have a friend who was in a group, and he brought up this point. Because this specific point lies about the council, and he says in his comment, it was either his comment or he was responding to someone. He says the Third Council of Constantinople does not say this, and someone in response to him said, "What do you mean the Third Council of Constantinople? This is talking about the 6th Council, not the third." And my friend told me he looked at the computer and was thinking, is this guy dumb? And he wrote, he said, the Third Ecumenical Council was the Council of Ephesus in 431. The 6th Ecumenical Council was the Third Council of Constantinople. So this person didn't even know the Ecumenical Councils. They must have treated this as if it was Constantinople 6 or something. But it goes to show how detached some people are from the ordering of the Ecumenical Councils. So, according to this claim made by, apparently, the Third Council of Constantinople, it forbade the faithful to take the sacred host in their hand, threatening transgressors with excommunication. And I would like to make clear right now that that is a load of lies. I'm trying not to curse here. If you look at my, I don't do this on Facebook, but if you look at my videos about the Ecumenical Councils, which is the In a Nutshell series, my church councils in a nutshell, in order to do my research for that, I had to look through every single canon of every single Ecumenical Council. I actually did that twice. I did it the first time when I was doing all the original scripts for those videos, up to Vatican II. And then I did it again, but in order to try and produce a series without narration, because I wasn't pronouncing things properly. But because of that, I am very familiar with the canons of those councils, and also where to find those canons if I want to read up on them. And I can tell you right now that nowhere in the Third Council of Constantinople is there a condemnation of receiving communion in the hand, nor an excommunication for receiving in the hand. That condemnation and excommunication do not exist at all. So the Fatima Crusader here is either blatantly lying about it, or they are completely ignorant about what the Third Council of Constantinople actually says. I mean, that's Hanlon's razor, isn't it? Hanlon's razor is, do not attribute to maliciousness what could be explained by stupidity. I sometimes swap out stupidity with ignorance, depending on if I want to hurt someone's feelings. But this Fatima Crusader here is right now lying about an ecumenical council, and I'm sure that there's probably somewhere in the church, in church law or something, there are severe spiritual repercussions for lying about an ecumenical council, or pretending to know about one, and misleading people, not having done any research beforehand. The next thing I'll be covering is about St. Thomas Aquinas, and lived here, I believe that's his lifespan, 1225 to 1274, and he says, "Out of reverence towards the sacrament, the Holy Eucharist, nothing touches it but what is consecrated. Hence the corporal and the chalice are consecrated, and likewise the priest's hands for touching the sacrament." Summa Theologica, Part 3, Question 82, Article 8, replying to Objection 8. Article 3, replying to, yeah, okay. So, looking at St. Thomas Aquinas, he says a couple of interesting things about it. So, to begin with, the principal act of the priest's order is to consecrate Christ's body. Now he receives the power to this effect at the handing of the chalice. Therefore the character is imprinted on him then. The conferring of power is effected by giving them something pertaining to their proper act. And since the principal act of a priest is to consecrate the body and blood of Christ, the priestly character is imprinted at the very giving of the chalice under the prescribed form of words. And then he goes further to say, "It is written," in, I guess, the Consecrationists or whatever, Distinction 12, whatever this reference is, "It has come to our knowledge that some priests deliver the Lord's body to a layman or to a woman to carry it to the sick. The synod, therefore, forbids such presumption to continue, and let the priest himself communicate the sick. The dispensing of Christ's body belongs to the priest for 3 reasons. First, because, as was said above, Article 1, he consecrates as in the person of Christ. But as Christ consecrated his body at the supper, so also he gave it to others but to be partaken of by them. Accordingly, as the consecration of Christ's body belongs to the priest, so likewise does the dispensing belong to him. Secondly, because the priest is the appointed intermediary between God and the people, hence as it belongs to him to offer the people's gifts to God, so it belongs to him to deliver consecrated gifts to the people. Thirdly, because out of reverence towards the sacrament nothing touches it but what is consecrated, hence the corporal and the chalice are consecrated, and likewise the priest's hands for touching the sacrament. Hence it is not lawful for anyone else to touch it except from necessity, for instance, if it were to fall upon the ground, whilst in some other case of urgency." So he isn't condemning communion in the hand here. He's condemning the use of laymen, or the usage of laymen to distribute communion. And he goes on further to talk about who can distribute communion. He says, "It seems that the dispensing of this sacrament does not belong to a priest alone, for Christ's body belongs to the sacrament no less than his body. For Christ's blood, belongs to the sacrament no less than his body. But Christ's blood is dispensed by deacons. Hence the blessed Lawrence said to the blessed Sixtus, Office of St. Lawrence, Response at Matins, Try whether you have chosen a fit minister to whom you have entrusted the dispensing of the Lord's blood. Therefore, with equal reasoning, the dispensing of Christ's body does not belong to priests only. The deacon, as being nigh to the priestly order, has a certain share in the latter's duties, so that he may dispense of the blood, but not the body, except in the case of necessity, at the bidding of a bishop or of a priest." St. Thomas Aquinas doesn't like laymen distributing communion, but if a bishop allows for it, then the bishop is allowed to do so. He has the authority to decide whether a layman, or effectively a person with non-consecrated hands, can distribute communion. And this is extended to deacons, and that applies especially today, where we have the permanent deaconate, not the transient or temporal deaconate, where in the past deacons are only ever ordained with the intention of one day graduating to be priests. But now we have the permanent deaconate, so people can remain deacons for life, really. But this is important, because for people who try to use this quote against communion in the hand, it's also condemning the usage of deacons in distributing communion. And again, as St. Thomas Aquinas makes clear here, the consecration of the priest's hands is not to touch the Eucharist, but to perform the transubstantiation or the consecration at the altar. It's not to actually touch the Eucharist. And concerning the Council of Trent here, which was 1545 to 1565, it claims that the fact that only the priest gives Holy Communion with his consecrated hands is an apostolic tradition. Now that is a correct quote from the Council of Trent. But even this doesn't condemn receiving communion in the hand. The next source is by Pope Saint Paul VI, and he says, this method on the tongue must be retained, Memoriale Domini. But again, this doesn't specifically mention communion on the hand being an apostolic tradition, nor is it a condemnation of communion in the hand. And I know I keep referring to the importance of why this isn't a condemnation of communion in the hand, but that's because this cheat sheet is used more for condemning communion in the hand than it is for proving communion on the tongue is an apostolic tradition. Pope Venerable Pius XII, in an earlier, in his Mediator Dei, paragraphs 62 to 63, he says, "It follows from this that the sovereign pontiff alone enjoys the right to recognize and establish any practice touching the worship of God, to introduce and approve new rites, as also to modify those he judges to require modification. Bishops, for their part, have the right and duty carefully to watch over the exact observance of the prescriptions of the sacred canons respecting divine worship. Private individuals, therefore, even though they be clerics, may not be left to decide for themselves in these holy and venerable matters, involving as they do the religious life of Christian society, along with the exercise of those of the priesthood of Jesus Christ and worship of God, concerned as they are with the honor due to the Blessed Sacrament, due to the Blessed Trinity, the Word incarnate, and His august Mother, and the other saints, and with the salvation of souls, as well. For the same reason, no private person has any authority to regulate external practices of this kind, which are intimately bound up with the church discipline, and with the order, unity, and concord of the mystical body, and frequently even with the integrity of the Catholic faith itself." Pope Venerable Pius XII telling us that the Pope does have the authority to effectively decide whether he has the authority to modify and create and dissolve rites as he desires to, which is what happened with Quo Primum. And if the Pope, and effectively the reasoning here is that the relation is that if the Pope wants to allow communion in the hand, he can. If he wants to allow communion on the tongue, he can. And the popes have this authority, regardless of what the trads like to claim about Quo Primum, which I can cover in another video. And the last source given here is by Pope St. John Paul II, who says, "To touch the sacred species and to distribute them with their own hands is a privilege of the ordained." And he said this in Dominicae Sene. I believe that's how you pronounce it, Dominicae Sene 11. This is missing a lot of context about what he actually says. He says, "In some countries, the practice of receiving communion in the hand has been introduced. This practice has been requested by individual episcopal conferences and has received approval from the Apostolic See. However, cases of a deplorable lack of respect towards the Eucharist species have been reported, cases which are imputable not only to the individuals guilty of such behavior, but also to the pastors of the Church who have not been vigilant enough regarding the attitude of the faithful towards the Eucharist. It also happens, on occasion, that the free choice of those who prefer to continue the practice of receiving the Eucharist on the tongue is not taken into account in those places where the distribution of communion in the hand has been authorized. It is therefore difficult, in the context of this present letter, not to mention the sad phenomena previously referred to. This is in no way meant to refer to those who, receiving the Lord Jesus in the hand, do so with profound reverence and devotion in those countries where this practice has been authorized." And this is from the same paragraph. So the problem here isn't that people were receiving in the hand, but that a lot of people were receiving in the hand irreverently. Do I need to continue on with this? No, I can end that here. So, if there's something to take away here from this overall article, is that it's not condemning communion in the hand, nor is it explicitly proving communion on the tongue is an apostolic tradition. It's basically meant to be an attack against communion in the hand, no matter how you look at it, because just the severity of some of these claims here, by claiming that communion in the hand is punishable, it's condemned as it's worthy of excommunication by an ecumenical council, that is a very severe accusation and claim to make. But when we look at these in further detail, we find that these source... What are the three classifications I give these? These sources are either unrelated, missing context, or completely false. And in this case, they've, as we see as Pope Saint Sixtus I, it's completely unrelated. It's talking about the sacred vessels and not even the method of reception of communion. With Saint Basil, it's ignoring that he was concerned about people not receiving communion before a deacon or priest, but he was fine with people receiving in the hand. The Council of Saragossa mentioned that it condemned people not receiving communion after receiving it, mentioning nothing about how they received it. The Council of Toledo just reaffirmed that if you receive communion, you should actually consume it. The Synod of Rouen was condemning the priests not treating treating the Eucharist reverently. The Third Council of Constantinople made no mention of communion on the hand or tongue, let alone excommunicated someone for receiving on the hand. St. Thomas Aquinas was against using laymen as Eucharistic ministers, but he was fine with people receiving in the hand, since priests had their hands consecrated specifically for the consecration of the bread and wine, and to perform the transubstantiation at the altar, not because they were the only ones who could actually touch the Eucharist. Pope St. Paul VI talks about the necessity of retaining communion on the tongue, but he doesn't mention a condemnation of communion on the hand, nor that it was an apostolic tradition itself. And Pope St. John Paul II was condemning people irreverently receiving communion in the hand, not condemning it as a whole, and he had nothing against communion on the tongue. So to take away anything from this publication, and I should probably wrap this up, it's that don't trust the Fatima Crusader. This cheat sheet that you see going around on Facebook and other social media sites, you can't trust it. It's most of its sources are either out of context, unrelated, or completely falsified. And someone who is either dishonest or ignorant enough to lie about an ecumenical council itself, okay, not just a synod, not just a council, but an ecumenical council itself, there is something inherently wrong with them, for them to have that sort of moral compass, to either lie or just be so uneducated in the faith that they would read this somewhere and just repeat it to anyone else. And I guess to an extent that could be extended to anyone who doesn't check these sources themselves. Whenever I see this and my friends see this, we all post the same list of refutations, basically saying this is unrelated, out of context, doesn't exist, and so on. And of all the times I've ever seen these refutations being given to people who promote this as true, I've only ever seen one person apologize for promoting false information, and that was one nice man who, when he said that, did you do the research on these canons before you, or research on this post which contained this image, did you do the research on this post before condemning it all as fake? And my friend said, yes, if you look up the Third Council of Constantinople, you will not find a condemnation of communion on the hand. And a day later, he came back to us. Sorry, I was just with my friend at the time. Sorry, I keep saying I. He came back to my friend and said, well, it looks like you were right, and I was wrong. I couldn't find any condemnation of communion on the hand at the Third Council of Constantinople. I clearly need to do more research. And my friend wished him well. But that was the only that was the only civil encounter we had with traditionalists, or who admitted that they were wrong when believing this cheat sheet. So again, don't trust this cheat sheet unless you can verify all the sources on this. The fact that they don't give any sources on this itself is quite telling. They're very selective with what they give. But the fact that they lie about an ecumenical council, or are just very misinformed about it, means you probably shouldn't trust anything that comes out of their mouth. Now I'm going to end this video here because I've got a lot of editing to do, considering due to an interruption I did, this thing is almost 48 minutes long. So I'm just going to end it here. The gist of it is, don't trust this cheat sheet. You can use this video if you want to refute it, but I do have refutations on my Facebook page that you can use. Go to Gigantian Apologetics, look up, what's the title of this series I did? Look up Misleading Cheat Sheet About Receiving Communion Refuted, and it's a 5-part series that you can look at. So otherwise, thank you all for watching this video. Hope you all have a good day. God bless you all. See you in the next video, comrades. Until then.